Welcome again, everybody. This is part 2 of a previous recording that we did. Well, for us, it was just a few minutes ago, but for you, you might have listened to it some time ago. It's the conversation around the strategies that we can use to empower our children if they are in a mainstream school setting. And again, just to qualify that, when we talk about mainstream, we're talking about an oral school that does not necessarily or specifically cater for children who have additional needs. So part 1, we spoke about what are the strategies. What are the barriers, firstly, and secondly, what are the strategies that as parents we can be aware of, and actions that we can actually take to support our children to optimize the learning. So that's really talking about what goes on in the classroom and the academic space. How can we put things in place so that they can fully access everything that's being taught? But as we ended off last time, we wholeheartedly believe that the space of well-being, so we're talking about social and emotional well-being of the child in that setting, is of equal importance. I mean, I often think it's more important, but certainly of equal importance than the academic side of it and the academic learning side of things. So this is part 2, where we want to talk about 2 things. The first thing, what you need to be aware of, and some strategies you could put in place to optimize your child's well-being if they are specifically in an oral mainstream schooling setting. And then secondly, just a few notes and a little chat about the culture of the school and how that plays into everything. So again, Bianca, I'll hand over to you to sort of spark the conversation. And yeah, so welcome to part 2.
Thanks, Debbie. And also, just in case someone is tuning into this one for the first time, just to say that we are by no means advocating one particular educational pathway for a deaf child, but as always, recognizing that what works for your child is what makes a certain pathway or set of decisions appropriate. And so, yeah, what we are talking about now, we are specifically focusing on an educational environment, but some of this information is applicable to even a home environment. Because it's similar things that children might feel, especially if they're the only deaf child in a family, to what they would experience if they are an only deaf child in a school environment. Not only do we hold the socio-emotional well-being as an equal, as Debbie said, even more important than academic well-being, but they are all completely interconnected. Mm-hmm. You're unable to learn effectively if you're afraid. And also, I think it's just only obvious that you learn most effectively if you are happy. And we don't ever really measure happiness and joy. And these sorts of things, I think, are so incredibly important. And it's what makes life purposeful and meaningful. If you aren't happy, but you're doing well at school, I don't think that's ideal. So looking at and spending time to really endeavor to understand what the experience of your child might be having at school is critical. And again, here, experts by experience, who are people who have lived this themselves, other deaf or hard of hearing people who have been in mainstream schools, have been in other mainstream environments, are people who can teach you what to expect, questions to ask, things to look out for. You might want to look for people like this to include in your life, but there are also lots of resources out there about stories and lived experience, and it's really worth getting hold of those and learning from them. I think something that we mentioned in the last video, but I'm going to mention it again, is that neurodevelopmentally, children go through phases where certain groups of people define them. And so it's just the way that they are. So when they're very tiny, it's their mom, and everything she does defines who they are. So if they're treated with love and care by their mom, that sets them up for a good inner identity. And as you progress to older years, you get that identity from different spaces, and it's just something that's been found to be pretty standard across the board. A younger child, when I say younger child, I'm talking about an early school going age child, starts transitioning from getting that identity from their family to getting it from their teacher. And you might know, I mean, often my child would come home from school and what the teacher said is gospel truth. It doesn't matter what mom says, it's the teacher. And so And so you just see how much they're in love with their teacher. They go through this
Totally.
absolute being totally in love with their teacher phase, which is so precious. But it's because of this. It's because they're getting that identity from their teacher. So it is really worth having a teacher fully understand where your child is at, so that should there be behaviors which look like depression or disinterest or whatever, that they are able to interpret that as a whole picture of a child who's not a hearing child. Even if they are hearing in that environment, they are a deaf child with maybe access to sound, and so they are actually different. And just honing in on who they are. When that then transitions from teacher, it goes into a space where it starts including peers. And that's a bit of a scary space for us parents, because it's even less out of our control. But that's also where it's important to recognize the valuable input that a peer group has on any child. We were talking about academics in the last video, and whilst we've spoken about almost advocates being you as the parent, the child themselves, and then their teachers as part of your army of support, never underestimate the role of a peer. It might just be that one peer in a classroom that transitions with your child who is the reason why they succeed. Someone who believed in them, someone who made sure they didn't miss in anything. And we've heard stories like this. Nurture those relationships with those peers. Make sure that they know that they are appreciated and seen. It's really, really vital. Yeah. So when it comes to just thinking about an individual deaf child in a mainstream setting, some of the literature suggests that children feel quite a sense of isolation if they aren't embraced in their deafness and in their uniqueness. And honestly, I feel that that should be the case for every child. Every child should be embraced as who they are, as a unique individual. And so this speaks a little bit to even the very first step of deciding what school to send your child to. In the last video, we spoke about class size and how that can affect sound and noise and might be a point to consider when choosing the school. But something really important is your school's ethos. And you can get a feel for what that might be by going to open days, by looking at websites. You're looking for a school who speaks to valuing the individuality of a person. One that upholds progress as something that they work with rather than always success. I think a school to avoid would be one that's driven continuously to be the best all the time. It would be an extremely stressful space for many children, but for a child who's already working extra hard to keep up, that might just tip them over the edge. So you're looking for a nurturing environment, one that's going to celebrate the difference in your child and not just feel like they're doing you a favor.
Yeah.
Another really important point when we're looking at emotional well-being of a child is looking at the emotional well-being of the family. If you have a mother who is completely strung out and stressed out because they feel like they only ever apologizing for the extra help that their child needs, it's just not going to work in the best interests of the child. So when we're talking about social emotional well-being of the child, we're essentially talking about the whole unit that is coming to the school.
Yeah. Just
making
to say,
heard.
Yeah. So I have had some experience in this in choosing a school, and certainly there were different options we had in mind, and we did a lot of research online, and that sort of gave us a lot of information. Spoke to people, we spoke to people who knew people, got in touch with people, but it was essentially in visiting the school that instantly a decision was made for us. And sometimes I wouldn't even call it a gut feel, although it was a little bit of a gut feel, but the response that we received was one, and for me at the top of the list was, where will my child feel the greatest sense of belonging? And what I mean by that is that you belong here just as much as everybody else. You are valued just as much as everybody else. And I felt that straight away with a certain school. And it was not only that you're going to belong here, it's not that you're going to have to try and fit in, or I think a lot of schools would be like, well, are they going to cope? Are they going to hold everybody else back? That's kind of, the feeling you get as soon as you say, well, my child has a few additional needs where they might need support. But it was the school that actually said, we can gain from having your child here. That was it. I was like, say no more. Say no more. It was that spirit with which we were welcomed. That, you know, that was the key thing, because I knew that was going to be the place where my child was going to be valued, and that was going to feed her emotional well-being. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can completely identify. I had a similar experience, and it was the litmus for me, of these people want my child.
They want my
because they see
child.
their value.
Amazing.
So I could be like, okay, we'll help you out, which was a feeling I got from somewhere else that I'd like gotten to know. So you're so right. You know, a child knows if they wanted there, and if they considered extraordinary as opposed to subordinary. So a child will know that, and a place that values all of their strengths, whether it be that they make a fantastic friend. You know, my deaf child, all of them actually, but one in particular, is the best listener that I've ever met. And honestly, I'm not talking about sound listening here. I'm talking about empathy. They're the person I want to be my best friend kind of going forward, because they are just so sensitive and empathetic. And so there are gifts, and often you find deaf children, there is this heightened empathy because they are experiencing what is being said with their whole selves. And so much of what we communicate is not just in our words, but in our facial expressions and our body language, etc. And so I'm often seeing that my child will come home concerned about somebody else in the class, and possibly nobody else noticed, but it was this tiny little thing that was happened in break time that made them feel worried about whether or not they are okay. And to have that brought into a classroom is just worth gold.
Absolutely,
so
I agree.
I think it's important for your child to also know that they are absolutely valued, and for you as a parent to know that too. And so seek places that are willing and desire to do that. Other opportunities that I've grabbed with both hands is, and this would possibly differ depending on the age of the child, because I haven't yet gotten to the teenage years, but with all due respect, I'm feeling very respectful of what lies ahead, because things could change. But I am, if anything, encouraging my child to make their deafness as visible as possible. Children or parents might feel like they need to cover the hearing aids, because what if they're teased because they have this ugly hearing aid on their ear? I'm just like, I think they're awesome, and if I think they're awesome, then you might also learn to feel like they might be awesome. And so we make ours stand out. And so whether that's been with bright colors that we've chosen, whether it's made sure that they're applied after the hair's tied back, whatever it might be, we are not perpetuating stigma that exists out there by feeling like we need to be shameful of something like a hearing aid or a cochlear implant being visible. They are standing out.
Absolutely.
And it's awesome.
I agree with you. In fact, I'm sure that my daughter thinks they're a fashion accessory. You know, the colors were chosen specific. In fact, her colors, the hearing aid colors, were chosen specifically to match the school colors. You know, which just was like, you know, it just symbolized everything I ever wanted in that little gesture. But certainly an accessory, and it's like, oh, today, look, my hearing aids are matching my top or whatever. And there is zero shame in those devices.
Absolutely. We found it's also really helpful, and again, this requires being brave. But quite honestly, on this journey, we are expecting our children to be brave, and they're going to need to be brave for the rest of their lives. But so are you as a parent. You're going to need to be brave. And I think it's only fair that if we're expecting that of our kids, that we should come to the party and be brave too. And always on this journey, I sort of see it as an interesting triad of our child's journey, my journey as their parent, and one that we do together. And in that journey, we have to be brave. So even if they are new at a school, what's really great is if you can get an opportunity where they can stand up at class and explain their hearing loss, explain what this is, how it works, make it interesting. Little things that impress kids are silly things, but so my kids have cochlear implants, and they are seriously expensive. I always tell my kids, you've kind of got 2 sports cars on your head. By the time you're 18, I could have bought you a sports car for what that value is. So for them to stand up in class and say, look, I'm deaf means I can't hear. If you speak all at once, I can't hear you with the mask, it's really hard. And I've got something that's almost like having 2 sports cars on my head kind of thing. It becomes cool. So talking through them on how they can address the class, you might need to stand next to them while they do it. You might need to do it for them and then ask them a few questions to involve them, depending on your child and where they're at, what their personality is. You might do that differently, but I really think that's a valuable space. So it's not a silent elephant in the room that there's a kid with hearing aids on their head that's just entered the classroom, but that we speak it out loud. We now have so-and-so in the classroom, they are deaf, they are hard of hearing, and they have hearing aids. Let's learn about it. That's so interesting. We've also taken every opportunity to incorporate hearing loss into things like orals and stuff that they might get. So an oral topic that they had earlier in the year was role models, and my one daughter chose a deaf role model. And again, just declared it to the mountaintops that this was their role model and they were deaf, and that's why they were their role model. When you're doing history and inventions, go and look up, even if it's not for the purpose of showing the class, this is really helpful for your child, go and look up deaf inventors, deaf history, people in history who invented things like the airplane, the internet. They exist. These are amazing people. And often a school curriculum won't specifically highlight that somebody was deaf or that telephone was made in light of a situation that was deaf related, etc. So get your kid involved in that and let them be able to share that with their classroom. There will always be opportunities. And again, if you're doing pre-teaching, you'll be aware of what's to come. So you can prime your child with saying, this is a great opportunity to put your hand up and say, well, as a deaf person, actually, sound doesn't work like that for me. And bring that into a conversation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fantastic points. And, you know, I think the starting point is that kids or peers in your child's class, they actually want to be kind. That's their default. They want to be kind. But often, if they don't understand something, and someone is different to them and they don't understand that, that's where you can get things like meanness. And it is actually the number one reason why any person is actually bullied. It's because they're different. So obviously our kids are sort of in that category of being different. So bringing in that understanding of everybody in the class, in the grade, in the school, of really understanding what's going on. Kids are actually fascinated and they love it. They love to know, they love to understand, and it goes so far in breaking down barriers. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about making friends. So in one of our previous discussions that we've had on well-being, which I would really encourage everybody to go back and listen to, because it actually feeds nicely into this conversation too, we spoke about exclusion. And we spoke about that being as a social species, as human beings, we are highly social, and feeling lonely or isolated is actually a very primal thing for us. It's really deep within our DNA. And so being excluded is one of, you know, the worst things, the most painful things that we can experience as human beings. So let's just chat a little bit about making friends and some strategies, etc. I just want to add, and then I'll hand over to you, Bianca, to talk about some strategies there that, again, I'm going to bring up the incidental learning. And I'm going to say that while incidental learning certainly affects what our children know academically from an academic standpoint, it feeds very much into playground. And this for me was always you know, the thing, what is going to happen on the playground? Because our kids won't have access to everything that's going on in this big group setting. And kids might be talking about, you know, what's cool, what's going on out there. And our kids are going to really struggle to keep abreast of this whole conversation, because who's talking? Okay, who's talking next? So much distraction, so much background noise. And actually it can be easier for them just to withdraw. We also then spoke about deaf anxiety, and that is the fact that you know, deaf children, it's a term that's been coined, deaf anxiety, because the world is not designed for somebody who's deaf. It's designed for somebody who's hearing. It leads to all these barriers where deaf people are left in a state of anxiety because they don't always know what's going on. They can't always keep track of what's happening, and that is especially in a group setting where you've got maybe, you know, 5 kids, even 3 kids, you know, 4 kids, 5 kids, 6 kids in a group setting. It's very hard to keep track and to benefit from the incidental learning that happens on the playground. So I think, strategies to make friends. Let's just talk a little bit about that. I know, Bianca, you've got some great words of wisdom here.
Well, I just wanted to start with saying what you mentioned about that talk that we've had before in Thrive Space about loneliness is something that I'll never forget, is how you taught us that it actually reduces your life expectancy. So this is not just a little fuzzy nice to have. This is critical to us functioning as human beings. So it's really important. So when it comes to friendships, whilst they aren't divided, I'm just going to speak to them to two different groups. One is those friendships that they'll have within their class at school, which will probably be hearing peers. These are friendships you really want to nurture. The friendships are formed at a social level on the playground, and that's going to be tough for our hard of hearing deaf children. So you're wanting to create opportunities outside the classroom for them to bond and connect. This could be, depending on your COVID regulations, etc., on a screen. If so, please use an app that does automated captioning so that they also don't feel insecure and it's not an anxiety creating experience. But it also could be in the form of play dates, whether it's in afternoons or during the holiday time, to make a specific effort to have your child engage in a one-on-one with a couple of little friends that they have identified as being ones they wanted to invest in friendship with. And then encouraging them to get to know those friends. So whether it be through identifying, like little girls love writing letters to each other. So my little girl loves writing a love letter to her friends and puts the little I love you hand on and explained that to her class. And now her little bestie is in every school photo. I see her putting the I love you hand, and it's just too precious. And just engaging on that. So really being purposeful about friendship making and sustaining with your children. Yes, it's going to take time. Another really great opportunity are extramurals. So whether it's a club or a sport that your child can be in with the friends that they've identified as ones that they might want to invest in a proper deep friendship with, that would be really great. It's an awesome opportunity for them to just be able to socialize and be outside of an academic setting, which might be one that doesn't lend to a lot of chatting in between. So those are some of the strategies. I'd also engage with the friends' parents and explain, my kid's deaf, they'd love to come for a play date. I'm really wanting them to form friendships because it's actually harder for them in this classroom setting, etc. I think it's important to involve parents in that conversation so that, again, this is a community you're building with your child. Bringing this attention to teachers. Teachers might experience your child as being shy when actually they're not being shy, they're being anxious because of the friendship circle situation, and just letting them get some insight into the fact that my kid is not engaging with other kids, or she's not opting to read because she loves reading. She's opting to read because she's avoiding an uncomfortable situation where she feels embarrassed about not always getting all the conversation that's happening in a little girl setting of a playground. And then strategies on the playground that might be really helpful is our kids have engaged with their peers, especially during this COVID time, where they can still keep a distance but still do fun game activities where, especially with the mask on, very hard. So an example, a game, Open Gates. You're supposed to call out a feature on someone, and then if they've got them, you run. Now, they can't hear anything if there's a mask on. But so they've converted that to hand signs, where it's like anybody whose name starts with a B, and then they know they come running. And so slowly but surely, the peers have identified that the deafness has helped all of us. And how cool is that? And it's just that little shift.
It's a shift.
But yeah, I really think that teachers and children who go out on a limb to serve your child in a way that's nurturing should be acknowledged and nurtured back. So something that just warms my heart more than I can ever express, that I saw on the classroom wall in my kids' classroom, are sign language letters spelling out "you are loved." And I didn't initiate that. That was completely the teacher. And that on the classroom for all children to see, first of all, made it cool. And second of all, made my child feel like I belong. And that's so important. So your child might not be one that's ever been exposed to sign language. You might not want to look at any of it at this time, or maybe it is something cool because it's something that does sort of make it visually deaf, so to speak, because otherwise it can be quite hard to sort of explain how you're different. But sign language is one thing that we've used to bring a coolness to the deafness in that space. The other group of peer is peers who are like them. So they might not be at the same school as your child, but here I'm speaking about other children who are deaf or hard of hearing. It is absolutely essential that your child knows other people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people of their own age, but also older people, so adults who have lived it. Some may serve as role models to your child. Expose them to those stories, and with the internet we've got quick, easy access to stories that might not be locally available to us. But make sure that you're nurturing or enabling your child to nurture friendships with other deaf or hard of hearing children. How do you do that? Where do you meet these children? Well, things like Thrive that have social events where you can meet children. At those opportunities, make sure you're swapping numbers with parents. And you're going to need to put effort into creating opportunities for your children to engage and socialize. And similarly with deaf adults, do whatever you can to find somebody who you can engage with, who your child can engage with, can see, can offload to. And so those two groups of peers are, I would say, absolutely essential. Your child wants to know that they're not the abnormal one in a normal setting, but they are different in this setting, and they bring joy and gifts to the setting, but there's another normal, and they're part of that too. And I just think that goes well towards their emotional well-being.
I absolutely agree with you. And I just want to, the one thing I will just wanted to stress was when you spoke about extramurals. So extramurals are very much a place where friendships are consolidated. It's often a smaller group setting. It's another opportunity for advocacy, for your child to speak about, you know, how they're different and what it means and what's cool about it and where they struggle and that, and an opportunity to engage with different children. But really then those children that they might have sort of developed a bit of a friendship with on the playground, to consolidate and solidify that. It's really, I think, you know, being active in engaging in the extramural curriculum is really important. And now I just want to touch a bit on the emotional well-being side. And I would like to say that just really make sure that you're in touch with and you keep connecting with where your child is emotionally. And what is particularly, and again, we've said the fatigue can represent itself in behavior that's, you know, maybe, you know, it looks like the child's depressed, looks like they're disinterested, they can't concentrate, they don't care. It might just be the fatigue. But certainly your child might experience anxiety, and as you've said, an anxious child can't learn. So keep checking in with your child. Where are they emotionally? And then we always talk about the sort of 3-step strategy with emotions. What can we do to deepen emotional intelligence? And again, we'll have a whole separate chat on emotional intelligence, but you know, it's equally important to celebrate the good emotions and to recognize and not discount the negative emotions. So if your child has been feeling excluded that day, or they did think maybe that another child spoke to them funny, we are all tempted to say, oh, it doesn't matter, or I'm sure she didn't mean it, or tomorrow will be better, or I'm sure that won't happen again. But actually, those strategies are not particularly helpful. It's so much more helpful for the child to really validate what they are feeling. Forget about the advice. Don't give them advice. Don't try to make the situation better. All you need to do is validate what they are feeling. And this is sometimes counterintuitive. So number one, listen with your full attention. When your child, and maybe listening with your full attention is not listening with your full attention. Maybe it's just picking up the vibes from your child. Be present. Be present with how they are feeling. Secondly, validate it. If they're telling you something that happened, maybe it's just a nod. It's getting down to their level. If they're a young child, it's a nod. So it's not saying, oh, you know, it doesn't matter. It's saying, I hear you, and I see you, and I see what you're going through. And then thirdly, super helpful, is to give what they are feeling a name. Label the emotion. deepens emotional intelligence, makes the child feel comforted, and enables them to move on from that emotion and not have that emotion sort of sink down into their body. Yeah, so do you want to add anything on the emotional side, B?
Yeah, it's very, very good. I think it's good to question, and I sometimes think that response of, oh, it doesn't matter, it will be better tomorrow, is also because this is deeply painful for us as parents when we see our child having a hard time. When my child comes home and tells me that she felt excluded on the playground, I'm experiencing pain. And so it alleviates my pain to say, don't worry, it's going to be better tomorrow, because it makes me feel better. It's certainly not making my child feel better. It's making them feel misunderstood and more isolated. So again, giving it a name and even just acknowledging, wow, that must have felt really hurtful. But in the same space, saying that having a victim mentality is not helpful to anybody, and in fact can be extremely disabling. So whilst we hold in their space, and I value that, I think negative emotions, that space needs to be held. It creates resilience for you to be able to manage them later when you get a disappointment, or you get a rejection, when you don't get the job you wanted, or you have a relationship that goes sour. If you've never been allowed to just dwell in a space of being negative alongside somebody else who just wants to be there with you in that space, then you're really going to struggle with those experiences later in life. So just on the not being a victim side of things, it's also good to ask your kids some reflective questions. Why do you think she did that or said that? Oh, I don't know, maybe she's just ugly. Well, is she just being ugly, or do you think something might have made her just be having a bad day? And then, oh, maybe she did come to school looking a little bit sad. Oh gosh, I wonder why she's feeling sad. Oh, yesterday in the news she told us that her granny died over the weekend. Oh wow, that could be making her feel sad, and that's why she said something she didn't really mean, but sure, that was really hurtful. So how are we going to address this with her tomorrow? What do you want to do? Do you want to write a little letter to her that you're really sorry about what happened with her granny? Like, and having that conversation. Again, this is more for a younger child, but even for an older child, just saying, gosh, that must have been so frustrating. Well, that was so hurtful. And coming back to it, because you've created for yourself you being a safe space. And I want to talk about that a little bit in a second, but just to say that allowing your child to empathize back reflectively. So we're saying that a deaf child being in a hearing environment teaches others to empathize, and that's fantastic. But your child might be a natural empath, but also an issue might be being able to sit themselves in someone else's position, which is called essentially theory of mind. So developing theory of mind with your child, having them being able to also be a perspective seeker, and therefore owning their negative spaces, being able to deal with them, but also looking for perspective. What is the intention behind behaviors? Because it might simply be that the other person doesn't know better. Just takes away them always being the victim in the situation, but rather put them in an empowering position. Safe spaces are really important, and by this I mean that you might want one or two or even three people in your child's life or more to be places where they feel like even their negative emotions can be held and cared for alongside them. I hope to be that for my children, but I also think that important places for that to exist is with a teacher. So for a child to nurture a relationship with a teacher, and even though they progress to another grade and leave that teacher behind, they'll never leave that teacher behind. They will always be their teacher, because they've been the one that's their safe space, someone that they can go to and say, I'm feeling so sad. I didn't get into the school play, and I think that might be because I'm deaf. And for the teacher to then be able to say, gosh, that's horrible if you feel like that, but let's think about it. Maybe you didn't get into the school play because Charlie was better at whatever, acting, whatever it might be, and bring some perspective to the situation. Or say, okay, well, maybe we can add something to the school play that involves, it would be really interesting to have something about deafness. Just go chat to the teacher. But having that safe space where they don't feel like anybody's going to judge them or tell them that their feelings don't matter, as an adult at school, I think is vital. But having that safe space at school with a fellow child is also vital. So that's where the friendship nurturing is important. If they can have a bestie that they don't feel embarrassed to say, I don't know what you just said, well, can you show me your notes, or whatever it might be,
yes,
is critical. And my bestie's going to say, hey, she said the test is not Tuesday next week, it's Wednesday. Thank goodness I've got you, you know. So those safe spaces are really, really important.
And then let's just shift quickly. I think we've spoken about it a lot already, so we probably just need to quickly touch on it. It's this culture of the school. And we've already said, you know, for us and for you, you might feel differently, but from a well-being perspective, the culture of the school is really essential. And when you first embarking on the journey, if you have made the decision or you're considering the decision, then certainly the school culture and the ethos of the school is super important. But I think what you and I both feel quite passionate about is advocating in that space. So not only are you choosing a school that's likely to be open and have a value system that you know mirrors your value system, but also is accepting and nurturing of differences and uniqueness. But in that space, us as parents, getting out of our comfort zone and moving into that space of bringing awareness and you know, teaching it's for me it's a class, it's a grade, and it's the entire school about your child and about the difference and the gifts that they bring into the space. And we have spoken a lot about that. I don't know if you want to just add anything there.
Yeah, no, just to re-emphasize that the space that your child's coming into is one where you have to believe that they are bringing good things to that space. If you don't believe that, if you're going into that space feeling like you're just going to ask for a whole lot of help, and it feels like you just position yourself then as less than everybody else in the space, that's going to trickle down to your child, but very, very critically to the culture. But if you come into the school saying, I have a gift here that you would be privileged to have in your school, that takes the level of the school culture to another level if they buy in. So if they're buying into a message like that, which is the truth, then that's a really great place to start. Then having really clear communication with your school. So whether it's a headmistress, headmaster, an HOD, a couple of points of contact who you can equip with information and knowledge about deafness, about your unique child, etc. People who are in a position of authority in the school, it trickles down. So if you can have a headmistress, for example, who has really decided that your child can add value to their space and is willing to advocate for that on your behalf, it can only trickle down to every other staff member. So I'd say it's important to identify people who are influencers in that space and bring them into your army. It's also really important to show appreciation, because actually any person being kind to you is something that we shouldn't just assume to be normal. We want to really appreciate and tell them how much we see the extra effort and desire to be part of your army. So if a school is doing that and you're always only ever pointing fingers at the gaps that are still there, you're eventually going to lose enthusiasm from that space. But if you are encouraging, if you are acknowledging, if you are thanking and showing gratitude along your path, you're going to nurture people wanting to help you and your situation. But I'd say those are just umbrella foundational points to the approach of looking at school culture. But there are other opportunities. There are global days of observation, such as World Hearing Day. If your child is a cochlear implant user, there's World Cochlear Implant Day. September is Deaf Awareness Month. I wouldn't suggest using all of them because that can be a bit overwhelming. But maybe picking one. Where every day, sometime in advance, you approach people in positions of influence in the school and say, how can we celebrate this as a school this year? And bring awareness. And maybe that's your child going up in assembly and doing a little something to bring awareness in the day. Maybe it's cupcakes that you send to their class with a little flag of the logo of that awareness day, etc. Maybe it's something like that, or maybe you'll come up with a better idea. But make the use of observation days. They're really
absolutely awesome. And I think what you will find is that those efforts are very welcomed. What makes a successful school, actually, one of the critical things is vested parents. And for a child to see that you are really vested in your child and in the school, But asking to come and talk at assembly, or asking for your child, or maybe it would be, I mean, we have newsletters that come out regularly, writing and asking to write a letter in the newsletter about inclusion, about Deaf Awareness Day and what that means for you and your family. You know, things like that. There is always an opportunity, and mostly it's going to be really welcomed with open arms. It does also sometimes require, I know certainly for me, for us to get out of our comfort zone. You know, it's an active effort. They're not going to come to you and say, would you like to write an article? Or would you like to come and talk? I mean, some schools might. It requires you to get out of your comfort zone, but we're with you in that. We've all had to do it. Yeah.
I think even just little things like if there is assembly and there is a visible transmitter for a FM system, there's these little things that initially look so different, but they very, very quickly become normal. And that when something starts becoming a new normal, you start having a culture shift. And that's what we mean by culture shift. We believe wholeheartedly that a child who is well suited, so we're saying a child that's well suited to this environment. I think that's really important to say. Where we're making decisions for our kids, we're wanting them to be in the best interest of our child too. So a mainstream environment is not going to be a good fit for many deaf children. So we're speaking about when it is a good fit.
Yeah.
And so we know it's a good fit. Therefore, we know we're bringing something. Therefore, we know this is good for our kids. And we might just need to assist others to shift their lens. But this is a journey also. There is not one size fits all. You might have a school that's a fantastic match for a certain season of your child's education. And as that season shifts, maybe it's not a great match for the next season. And don't feel afraid to change things. I mean, there are a lot of families with hearing children who change schools as different seasons change in their lives too. So when you're making a decision, it doesn't have to be a forever decision. There are forever yeses in this life, but there are also yeses that aren't forever yeses. And I think sometimes we put the pressure on ourselves for the non-forever yeses in the same light that we do for the forever yeses. And certainly school, we want it to be a great experience for our kids, but it doesn't have to be a forever yes. Yeah. Go with every day with the best of your ability. Make those moments count. Nurture relationships. I just really think that relationships with your teachers, relationships with your school, serve them as best as you can. Get involved in school governing bodies. Volunteer to serve at sports days, etc. Do your part to serve them, and in turn you will get a culture of service where you will receive what you reap, you sow. And if you serve service, you will get that too. And be that person who is speaking truth about your child in every given time. Never dumb it down because you want it to suit what someone else is expecting to hear. Speak truth. Believe the best about other people. Believe the best about your child. Have high expectations for your child, and nurture that journey alongside staff and teachers and other families to have the same high expectations for your child. Yeah. What's most important is that your child is happy. So make sure that they are actively part of the process. And there will be times of transition, depending on when your child's very little, where you're doing a lot of this for them, where they start changing and doing more for themselves. And then what they think about the situation, the choices for their lives matter more than what you think. And that transition can be complicated. But just be in touch, be present, and acknowledge the gift that this journey enables you to be so present with your child.
Amazing. Such wisdom, Bianca. Thank you so much. Everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. And yeah, we'll be in touch again soon.
Yes, thanks everyone. Thank you to supporters, whether it's friends and families that also celebrate and cheer next to us on our journey, whether it's headmasters and headmistresses and teachers and HODs who also say, we are here with you, teach us, show us, let us work this together. Celebrating our kids is our primary agenda, and we're so grateful to anybody else that does that with us. So thank you so much. Know that you are appreciated.
You are. Bye, everyone.
Bye.